Even if New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr doesn't want to be in New Orleans anymore, the time to trade him has come and gone. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, New Orleans Saints signed a new free agent. We're going to give you some free agency updates as well as get you some thoughts on Velus Jones Jr., the newest wide receiver / running back / return specialist to suit up for the black and gold. And you kick everything off today. Derek Carr might want to be traded, might not want to be in New Orleans, but the time to depart has come and gone. We appreciate you very much as always, making us your first listener, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Lots of rumors going around and have been going around all offseason about the potential for a split between the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr. We've highlighted those here on the show. I've made my points from before the final commitment to Derek Carr as a 2025 quarterback on why a split would make sense for the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr at that time. I made my pitch for when the contract of Derek Carr was restructured, the reports coming out that Derek Carr and his camp were willing to test the market. I made my pitch for why the Saints should have let him test the market, although hindsight, right? Too late. Move was already done. And now rumors continue to swirl that Derek Carr potentially wants out of New Orleans, and the New Orleans Saints could entertain potentially a trade to send him away. And really, it's too late. That time has come and gone. I did a little bit of a segment about this the other day where I was talking about how it was Todd McShay's report around, Derek Carr could be a player that other teams key in on if they don't like their quarterback situation following the draft and stuff like that as a quote-unquote interesting option. Let me not say quote-unquote, paraphrasing, interesting option for that team. And I explained why, that's absolutely right. Like, Todd McShay is absolutely correct. There is a chance that teams out there, let's say the Giants, don't get who they want at quarterback, right? That they could look around the NFL and they could pinpoint a guy like Derek Carr and say, oh, that's somebody that interests us. But that's not the same. And this is the part that Todd McShay wasn't saying. That's not the same as the Saints openly shopping Derek Carr to be moved, right? Those are two different things. You could be interested in my Carr all you want. That doesn't mean that I have to give it to you, right? And so we can apply that logic to just about anything that any person has the rights to, not necessarily owns, but has the rights to. And so in that situation, there's always a chance that Derek Carr becomes interesting to some other team, no doubt about that. However, for the Saints, making that move is one that doesn't make sense, not because the Saints should commit themselves to Derek Carr, or Derek Carr should commit themselves to the Saints, but because the time has passed, it's too late. Trading Derek Carr now absolutely puts you in an awful situation in 2026. Now, is it an insurmountable situation? No. Is it a situation that the Saints have shown that they have a propensity to get through? 100%. And it will only be a one-year situation, not a multi-year situation. So I get all of that, right? I'm not trying to say that it's impossible. I said this the other day too. It's not impossible. It's just, if you were going to do that, you should have done it already. Like, that's really my line of thinking here. The right time to do that was before restructuring Derek Carr's contract. The right time to do that was when you had a new head coach who came in and was seemingly non-committal around the quarterback. And at that point was a point at which it made sense to maybe say, we should see if somebody wants this guy. Especially if Derek Carr himself, or at least his camp, were indicating that there was an interest in at least seeing the market. Fine, go see the market. Go check it out. You have our permission to go and seek a trade. That's the way that I would have gone about it if I were New Orleans. And then knowing that, I'm not going to get a ton, or knowing that, whatever the value is, like, that's the next piece of all that, right? You got to make it worth my while as a team if I'm going to end up moving you. But that time now is kind of tough. And so now what really feels like the Derek Carr story is going to be here in New Orleans is that he's going to play in some amount of games in 2025. We'll see what that is. And after that season is done, after the season is done, a designation of a post-June 1 cut makes sense at that point. Because if you trade Derek Carr now, which you're not going to trade him now because you're absorbing a bunch of dead money now, it would be a disaster to do it right now. You'd have to wait until after June 1st because you can't designate a trade post-June 1, right? You have to literally wait until after June 1 in order for that to, defer salary and all those other things. So you could do that. The $19 million of dead cap that sets in this year is already accounted for. It's not new money that you're being charged. It's money that's already accounted for. But then next year, you've got to be able to absorb $59+ million, $59 million of dead cap that does and a large portion of that does accelerate into that year in a way that it wouldn't have been accounted for in 2026 on its own. So that's the part that makes it really tough is what it means for your 2026 if you end up trading him away after June 1. If you trade him after June 1 at this point, you're saving $1 million here in 2025 and the dead cap's already accounted for. You get some kind of draft capital. I don't think it would be that much, but making a team not have to pay all of that money, you could actually probably get more now than you would have gotten before, right? Because you've effectively already paid them at that point. And so that could be something to where, hey, if the deal's right, everybody's got a price, right? Everybody's got a price. Every team's got a price for every player. And if the deal's right, then sure. But it just feels like if you were going to make that decision would have already been made, or you would have made that decision already. The way that I think that this is going to work out, and we'll see. Is there a chance that Derek Carr gets traded post-June 1 this year? Yeah, absolutely. It's always a chance, right? If I came on here and said that there's a 0% chance that something's going to happen, I'd be lying to you because no such percentage exists when it comes to possibilities. And so the next thing, though, is that if he doesn't get traded and he does play in 2025 in the Saints and he do move on, what do they do? Well, they designate him as a post-June 1 cut next year. And then you do that, you get charged the $19 million that's already accounted for in next year's salary cap. And then you end up pushing ahead about $50 million or a little bit less in 40 million in 2026 at that 2027, at that point, which is a little bit easier to manage. It is about $50 million actually is what you would take on. So you would take on a little bit next year and then you would defer a little bit less, but you're deferring a little bit less into a year where you have mad salary cap space available, over $100 million of salary cap space available at this point, right? As we've continuously said, that number will continue to shift and change. We don't even actually know what the salary cap is in that year yet, so we'll have to see. We assume it's going to continue to go up. There's a chance that it's over 300 million by then. Like, it's kind of wild. But you and the NFL as a whole have already shown that, especially at the quarterback position, you're willing to just eat some of that dead cap in order to move on. So I would expect that to be the case next season. But the Saints making a move to trade him after June 1 this year just makes less sense now than it did if they would have moved him before restructuring his contract. It doesn't make it impossible, but it certainly makes it more of a move that would be a shock, a surprise, right? It feels like if you were going to do that, then the time to do that has come and gone. And so now we're looking ahead to a potential split between the player and team in 2026, which is not the way you want to be talking about a team and its quarterback before a season begins. Like, let's be honest, like typically you're not looking ahead to the next year going, yeah, this is probably their last year together. So we'll see how the Saints manage that, which to me is way more intriguing than the potential for a trade and all these other things. It's like, how do you manage that over the course of a season? How do you play nice over the course of a season? We'll see which way they go. But this whole Derek Carr rumor mill and everything like that, it's active because there's feet, don't get me wrong, but it's not something that would be without shock, surprise, and even a little bit of awe, in all of it. Far before the New Orleans Saints make any decision like a post-June 1 trade of Derek Carr, they've already been pretty active in free agency. I want to take a look at the most recent move, the signing of Velus Jones Jr., what he potentially brings to this team, and update you on some of the players that are on their way out that still have not been signed. Who should they bring back? We'll dive into that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And as March Madness is here, FanDuel is giving you everything you need to be able to get in on the action all throughout the tournament like never before. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets All you got to do is when your first $5 bet, you do that, you get $200 in bonus bets that you can use on any number of things like big time comebacks, buzzer beaters, Cinderella stories, and even getting ahead and betting on who is going to cut down the net. You can dive into all that over at FanDuel today. For your favorite today, if you're a first-time user, you're trying to figure out where to put that $5 down, I would go for the money line on the Los Angeles Clippers, who are 13-point favorites over the Charlotte Hornets. Bet on a heavy favorite when you got that first $5, so that if you win, you get that $200 in bonus bets. You can get that today over at FanDuel.com, who's making it possible for you to get in on all of the college hoops action as the tournament rolls along. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation? The New Orleans Saints have a new signing, and they have several players on the way out the door that they could potentially still bring back. Let's start off with the newest signing, wide receiver Velus Jones Jr., he actually has more career rushes, carries, and rushing yards than he has receptions and receiving yards, funny enough. Since coming into the NFL from the Tennessee Volunteers, he was excellent in that Josh Heupel, Hendon Hooker, Tennessee offense. 7 touchdowns that season. I think it was 70 catches, over 700 receiving yards as well. Just a whole load of sevens for him on his stat sheet. Pretty cool. But then he got to the NFL as a 3rd-round pick by the Chicago Bears and was effectively utilized more so as a running back than anything else. I think they were trying to get a little bit of Cordero Patterson out of him, right? You think about what it is that Cordero Patterson did in Chicago, in other team, with other teams and all that. One of the big things that you saw was him as a return specialist, as a receiver, as well as a rusher. And I think that's what they were trying to get out of the 5'11", 204-pound, 4.31 speed Velus Jones Jr. I think some of the issues came down to hands, right? Some issues with catching the football, a little bit of issues with ball security, as well as something that we've seen kind of criticized or highlighted about him. But let's see what happens when he gets into a new environment. Do I think that Velus Jones Jr. is somebody that's guaranteed a roster spot? No. Nobody that comes in and signs a 1-year deal, which is what this deal will be. Nobody that comes in and signs a 1-year deal is a guaranteed rostered player, 53-man roster, making the team, all this other stuff. But as we've seen for the New Orleans Saints, guys that make the practice squad, guys that they bring in the offseason that maybe don't make the roster, but then they find their way back to the team later on when injuries set in and things like that. Like, these are important bits of information gathering that you can do. And a guy like Velus Jones Jr. has a lot of raw talent. He just hasn't really been able to find a spot where he is utilized in such a way that it elevates what it is that he does from that perspective. And so if you can find a guy like him and be able to create a Cordero Patterson type of role for him, and he's able to play to that, he's able to maximize that, he's able to get some things done with that, then yeah, I think that that's worth at least making a light investment of a 1-year deal and getting a look. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Cordero Patterson weighed in, at 6'2", 220 pounds. That's not where Velus Jones Jr. is, right? But he is a bigger bodied wide receiver, even at 5'11", 204 pounds. Like, he's got some substantial stature behind him, right? And so finding out if he can play that kind of a role could be a fun thing to have in your offense. And so, yeah, I think you do roll the dice here and then see what you're able to get. If he doesn't make the roster, it doesn't hurt anybody. He gets to go and have another opportunity elsewhere after catching on with another system and another coach and all that. More people to say nice things about him. Great. Like, that's all good. And so I think it's a fine roll of the dice. Do I think that it solves your wide receiver room or finishes your wide receiver room? Let me say it that way. No, of course not. But I don't think that's what this signing is intended to do. I don't think that this is the type of signing that a team like New Orleans, or that any team across the NFL, who could use a veteran presence, who needs a big-bodied, contested catch, physical, slant receiver type body, X-receiver role, or to fill that X-receiver role. I don't think anybody would sign a 1-year player and go, dust their hands off and say, I got it. Done. You see that? You see what I just did? See that signing I just made? I don't think anybody would do that. You know what I mean? And so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens when it comes to Velus Jones Jr. Will he make the roster? We don't know. But if nothing else, should be fun to watch throughout training camp. The Saints also have a bunch of outgoing guys, one of which just got signed by the Seattle Seahawks, not just Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who is one of those guys. He did get signed by the Seattle Seahawks and actually could potentially earn the Saints a 7th-round compensatory selection in 2026. But the Saints also saw to the Seattle Seahawks go cornerback Shamar Jean-Charles. I was hoping that Shamar Jean-Charles would be back. I think he's a very talented player. He's a fantastic special teamer as well, in the very least. And so being able to get a guy like that back to help to continue to bolster your cornerback room, I think would have made sense. But he ends up heading over to the Seattle Seahawks. So what I wanted to do next was take a look in number or just jersey number order, the players that are on their way out that could potentially be brought back and play a little bit of stay or go. And this isn't my opinion. This is, well, it's my opinion on what I think the Saints will do, not necessarily my opinion on like what I would do. Does that make sense? So it's more predictive than it is opinionated. And I'd love to hear some of your stuff too. So I'm going to go through some of these names, not all these names, because some I don't think are going to be back and they're pretty obvious. So I'm going to go through some of these names. Ugo Amadi, I think he's going to end up landing somewhere else. He seemed more like a Dennis Allen guy than, and so I think that with Dennis Allen not being here, there might not be a path back for him, but I do think that he's a good young leader to have around. I have a lot of respect for Ugo. Would love to see him back. He's great in the locker room, all that other stuff, but I don't know. That felt like more of a Dennis Allen tie than anything else. Willie Gay Jr., I'll give you my opinion here very quickly. I would bring him back. I think you need depth at linebacker, and I don't think that the Saints used Willie Gay Jr. very well last year, and I think that this core group might be able to utilize him a little bit better. I just don't know if he fits the system for Brandon Staley. I'm going to say no, that they don't bring him back, but he's somebody that I think a lot of people would be pleasantly happy to see return to New Orleans for sure. But I don't think that the linebacker will be back here in 2025. Equinemi is St. Brown, the wide receiver. I'm not seeing him back yet. We'll certainly see what happens there. Adam Prentice, the fullback. This one's really interesting because I don't know how much Kellen Moore is going to utilize a fullback, so I'm going to say no. But something to really watch here because I don't know how much Kellen Moore's offense is going to use a fullback here in New Orleans. And it doesn't seem like they're in a rush. Remember, there were years where they would sign like 2 or 3 different fullbacks early on in free agency. Like Xander Horvath was early. You go back to, oh my goodness, I can't remember the guy's name. But yeah, it doesn't seem like there is Alex Arma. I knew I was going to get it. Alex Arma. You were all screaming it. It's Alex Arma, you idiot. Got it. But it doesn't seem like they're in a rush to like bring in another fullback or anything. So really interesting. Maybe we don't see the fullback in this year's offense. I don't know. That'll be one that we watch for. Lucas Patrick, I'd probably say no, but he's probably somebody you make an emergency phone call to if you don't address your offensive line, and we still haven't seen the New Orleans Saints do that with a signing that brings you the value of a starter. Landon Young, I would bring back, another swing tackle guy. I would absolutely see them bringing him back. And then Tanoh Kpassagnon is somebody that I would absolutely bring back as well. I don't think you're going to see guys like Shane Lemieux and Oli Udoh back, but Tanoh Kpassagnon on the defensive line, just that versatility, his ability to move around, all that kind of stuff just feels very Brandon Staley-esque. So he's somebody I could see back, but we'll see. He was avoiding contract though. So the Saints have already taken on a dead cap hit by not bringing him back. It wasn't a lot though. It was just over $1 million. It's probably not that big of a deal. And so you could potentially see him end up, if he tests the market and doesn't find the value that he wants and a role that he wants, then maybe you could see him come back to New Orleans. And then the Saints could sign him to a new deal. They'll still have to pay that $1 million or take on that $1 million+ of dead cap. But again, that's eeny beady teeny weeny baby dead cap. I'm not worried about that at all for the Saints. So I don't think they're going to be worried about that. All right. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, Mock Draft Monday. Post free agency week 1 mock draft. And we'll start off with bringing in a big body pass catcher to get it started, because the Saints have not done that, and will hopefully fix their offensive line starter gap as well in tomorrow's Mock Draft Monday. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else or in your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson and OLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.